Welcome to the Information Security Forum podcast. I'm your host, Tavia Gilbert, and today you're listening to the second of 2 episodes in which we're examining the role of the board in cybersecurity. Steve Durbin, ISF Managing Director, is back in the studio, and we're going to be talking about the skills shortage and how a business's board can meaningfully help to address it. We'll also discuss the realities as the board's role evolves as cybersecurity and technology become further integrated in all levels of the business. Let's talk a little bit about the cyber skills shortage, which I think is not a small problem. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem, I think, for every size of organization, having the appropriate skills in place. You know, it's always been an issue for organizations to have the right sorts of people, irrespective of whether it's in cyber or any other element of your business. But there is clearly a shortage of appropriately skilled cyber people in the world. We're all chasing the same, whether you happen to be in the public sector or the private sector, doesn't really matter, whether you're a small enterprise or a large one. And I think that there are a number of things that we need to be doing so that we can address that in a slightly smarter way. One is the use of technology, certainly. I'm a big fan of things like machine learning, artificial intelligence in that particular space. I think that that can offer up some solutions to the cyber skills shortage in certain areas.
Not a blanket replacement.
Not a blanket replacement. It will never be a blanket replacement in my view. We will have to have an environment where human and machine are working together in that. But it can take away some of the more mundane tasks and so free up time, I think, for experts to focus on other areas. So, you know, perimeter scanning and those sorts of things, access control and so on. You know, machine learning is well suited to that sort of thing. So I think that's one element of it. I think the second element of it is we need to be much more open to the idea of bringing people into the cyber security industry who do not have some of the qualifications that perhaps we might have expected traditionally. So if you buy into my premise that security is going to have a technical focus, IT security, and it's then going to be much more business driven, why wouldn't you be taking people with a marketing background, with a human resources background? If you buy into my suggestion that the CISOs of the future have to have a higher degree of emotional intelligence, empathy, sales, consultancy-based skills, why wouldn't you be taking people that have those skills already? You can teach them some of the technical componentry that they need to understand at a senior level. You know, we're not asking them to go in and create code, but they are going to bring some of those softer skills, some of those more business-related skills that we lack in the cybersecurity industry at the moment. And that, for me, then, is the way forward. Is it going to solve the skill shortage? No, of course it's not. It's not going to solve it. Is it going to make it more manageable? I do believe it will, because you're getting much more appropriate insight into the way that cybersecurity might be used in a business environment than you are otherwise. So I think that every organization needs to get smarter about how they use their resources. You know, it's interesting, somebody said to me the other day, you know, what's the one thing that you spend most time thinking about? And for me, it's about people. It's about how I attract and retain the right level of people. If I don't have the right people in the organization, my organization can't function effectively. And that means that you have to create the right environment, you have to be having the right sort of opportunity. And I think it means that there needs to be a change in terms of the way that we view everything from work-life balance through to career progression and development. And that's a significant challenge, I think, for most organizations, irrespective of size going forward. But that, for me, again, is fundamental if you're going to be able to attract and retain the right people.
Right. So let's tie this back to the board. What is the board's role? I mean, it sounds like you're saying you have to set the company culture in many different ways. But is that the board's role in addressing the cyber skills shortage?
I think that the board's role is partly that, yes. I think that the chief executive is responsible ultimately to the board for the way in which the organization runs. For me, the board should be providing support to the CEO in terms of the way that he or she is able to go about doing their job. And there are some things that the board needs to be very actively engaged in, things as we've talked about, like risk appetite, culture. But they need to be taking their guidance and lead from the CEO. So I think the CEO's job has also become much more complicated because he or she needs to understand also some of the implications that we've just been talking about, and to be able to translate that as well to board colleagues, so that you can actually narrow down where you really want your board to be focusing, so they can really add some value. Mm-hmm. They don't all need to be technically proficient. They need to be technically aware. Uh-huh. And there's a difference for me.
Yeah.
I don't want a board member to be able to crack code.
Right.
I want the board member to understand the implications of a breach on our business and to help me put in place the right risk profile that is acceptable to all of us on the board, so that that can be implemented and driven through the organization. And I then want my board members to lead by example. Mm-hmm. So if we, for instance, have a situation where we say quite clearly that all devices need to be password protected, I expect my board members to be doing that. Mm-hmm. If we have a situation where board papers are being sent out with, confidential or highly confidential data in them, and we have a policy for storing that information, I expect my board members to be leading in that particular instance. So there are certain things that they can do which sound very, very simple when you talk about it, but unfortunately, still a lot of that isn't embedded into the culture of many organizations.
So you feel that, if I'm interpreting you correctly, you think that the board needs to exhibit leadership in having the best cyber hygiene themselves. Is that true?
I do, because if you think about it, the board is ultimately holding some of the most valuable information that the organization has. And when we go back to looking at critical assets and protecting critical assets, that therefore is where we need to be putting some of our focus and attention. And it isn't just about technology. The human piece has a key role to play in securing our environment. And so, yes, for me, the board has to be setting an example, has to be really at the top of its game in demonstrating leadership in that particular area.
That's a useful expectation to have voiced. I wonder if the cyber skills shortage and the lack of buy-in from the board, is this a temporary problem that will resolve itself just over time? Or is this going to be a persistent issue?
I think they're two separate things. Over time, my hope would be that the board problem will go away, because cyber becomes so much more built into the way that a business operates. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's that element to it. In terms of skill shortage, is that one going to go away? I don't see a time within the next 5 to 10 years when that situation will be the case. And I say that because we have to be bringing people through the education system.
Right.
We can't suddenly wave a magic wand and magic up, millions of people with the cyber skills. And so it's going to be a gradual process. And I think that's going to take time. So we have to learn, I think, as organizations, how to deal with a shortage of skills in that particular space. And maybe that's by increasing collaboration. It's by increasing cooperation. It's by determining, I think, where you might go and buy in skills. That's a good way of, in a short-term basis anyway, of addressing some of that issue. Because maybe you outsource some elements of it to an organization that's able to serve multiple clients. And so you get around the problem that way. But I think that, the challenge for organizations, for heads of human resources, CEOs, boards, is to come up with an imaginative way of addressing that skills shortage that will involve things like identifying the right skills profile of individuals, providing them with the most appropriate level of training and opportunity so that you keep them for as long as possible, and then marrying that up with outsourcing and using third parties. So I don't think there's one simple solution to it. I think that there's a number of different ways that we can look at it, but I don't see it as a short-term problem. I think it's going to be here for, as I said, at least the next 5 to 10 years.
It's a long time.
Well, is it? In the life of an organisation, it isn't. And there will as well, I think, be a lot of very significant change taking place in that whole sort of technology area over that period of time as well. So on the one hand, yes, if you're living with that challenge on a daily basis, that is a long time.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, which I think is really why we need to get smarter at how we deal with it and how we rise to that challenge.
If you were a student, a young person looking ahead to career building, what would you think would be the smartest way to go about making yourself the best asset to the best company as a cybersecurity leader?
I think it's a really tough question to answer. I mean, philosophically, my advice to anybody who wants to be the best is to do what they love the most. Mm. If you do that, then being the best comes naturally.
Right.
I think where it becomes complicated is where you perhaps force people down a certain road, or they feel that that is where they ought to go. But I think that increasingly anybody entering the job market or looking to develop a career, needs to be agile, needs to stay up to date with all of the developments, needs to have a very clear idea, I think, of the direction that they want to move in, and needs to seek out opportunities actively for that. So I think that there's an increased role for the individual in terms of directing their career. And I think that will, for some, involve public sector, for some it will involve private sector, for some it will involve working for themselves, for whoever is providing them with the best opportunity. And I think that is, the nature of work going forward. I think that we're also going to see much more of a need for remote working and acceptance of that. I'm a big fan of it. I don't see a need for many organizations to have, large workforces in the same place. And we're seeing that with people moving out of big cities and move towards remote working. The technology exists. When we have a 5G infrastructure in place as well, it will be even easier for us to have, very high quality video, for instance, for remote meetings and things to be taking place. And I think that becomes the norm as well. So by doing that, we can address some of the work-life balance issues in there too, hopefully.
Yeah.
As long as we don't become, hooked on being always on, of course, that's always the danger.
Right.
But I think that's where the educational piece comes in as well. But yeah, I mean, my best advice is to find what it is that you really love doing and stick with it.
Yeah, good. Thanks a ton. I hope that this has been a really helpful series with lots of practical ideas for how CISOs can relate better to the board and how the board can set a company up for cybersecurity success, even if its members aren't super tech savvy themselves. Steve, I appreciate you bringing your crystal ball to give us some insights into what the evolution of cyber might mean for businesses and their employees going forward. Listeners can find more research, practical tools, and guidance for making their business more secure at our website, securityforum.org. We invite you to get in touch with ideas for future podcast topics or guests on Twitter @SecurityForum. If you're enjoying this podcast, please help spread the word by sharing it with your colleagues and rating it wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back again soon.